This was the real Marion Davies. The collision between Hearst and Orson Welles, the battle over Citizen Kane, was in large part a fight over the honor of this woman. For when the real William Randolph Hearst fell in love, he did it to scale. Mountains would move. Palaces would be built. The nation as a whole was going to love this woman. He saw her in a chorus line in 1915. Hearst was 52, with his wife pregnant at home. But he still haunted the theaters. Second row, one seat for him, one for his hat. He was familiar to the showgirls, one of the wealthy men who'd give a girl something nice if she favored him with her company. Marion was 18, but a practiced hand at this game. When she lost his first gift, a Tiffany watch, she called Hearst up and got another. She was a gold digger and made no bones about it, but she knew how to make Hearst laugh.
She was incredibly, heartbreakingly beautiful. And she had been raised much in the tradition of Colette, where her mother encouraged her to pay a lot of flattering attention to men of incredible means.
Marion was absolutely enchanting. Everybody loved her. She was cheery, jolly, generous, and full of humor and wit. She was just a glorious gal.
When Hearst finally realized he was never going to be president, there was this consolation. He was now free to live as he chose. Hearst meant to move to California, to the ranch he'd known as a boy, without giving up his wife, his children, or any piece of his business empire. He was going to add a new life of impossible scale. He would turn San Simeon into a palace. He would take on the movie business, not to dabble, but to become a movie giant, a mogul. And he would live openly with a showgirl, 35 years his junior. But she wasn't going to stay a showgirl.
The first film that he produced for Marion Davies was his favorite historical romantic epic. And in order to premiere the film, he goes to the theater and completely remodels the theater and even surrounds the entire movie screen with hundreds of thousands of pink roses and fans that are strategically placed to waft the scent of roses across the audience.
For another Davies epic, when knighthood was in flower, Hearst spent 15 times the normal budget, an amount he then publicized in his papers.
It's well known how much he used his papers to feature her. This overwhelming diet of Marion Davies every day in Hearst papers really almost became kind of a joke. Literally, he was shoving her down the public's throat.
The trouble was that Hearst liked her to be kind of genteel and use her and kind of liked to see her in costume pictures. And that wasn't what she was like. She was actually quite mischievous and had a great sense of humor and really is charming. It's just the stuff that Hearst didn't like to see her do.
She was beautiful, but she had the ability to be comic. And I think that without Hearst fettering her, she could have gone on and had a great comedic career. And that just didn't happen.
In Hollywood, they said she'd be nothing without Hearst. Marion was the sort who'd say so herself. She never complained about his 12-page telegrams, dictating every scene in her films, as she never complained publicly when Hearst's wife would appear in California and Marion had to move out of the ranch. She had her own way of making her points to Hearst, or Pops as she called him. She knew he had his private detectives reporting on her when she had affairs with Charlie Chaplin, Leslie Howard, Dick Powell. Well, Marion would say, that should give him something to think about. She liked champagne, liked a crowd. He made San Simeon into a palace, but it was she who turned it into the gathering place for Hollywood.
They went there for parties, he and my mother. And my mother used to say it was just an amazing event. I mean, you'd get there, you'd be shown to your room, you would have 2 servants, and that Saturday night you had to come to dinner because it was a costume party. And when you got there, they would have your costume ready. I'd say, you, Mrs. Mankiewicz, will be Pierrot, and you, Mr. Mankiewicz, are going to be a knight, and here's your armor.
There are a lot of accounts of people being driven up there and saying, we're on Mr. Hearst's ranch now, and they couldn't see anything, and they drove for miles and miles and miles. It's about half the size of Rhode Island, is what he owned. He had the largest private zoo in the world. Most of the comparisons, at least that his guests made, were to a feudal lord, really presiding over his own kingdom.
Hearst would slip away from his guests to his study, where he'd spread out 14 Hearst papers on the floor. The old man was still about acquisition, more of everything, Marion and movies, newsreels, magazines, more homes, more artwork, and he was riding his editors, more readers. When Fatty Arbuckle was falsely accused of rape, Hearst invented a new sensation: Private Lives of the Stars. He rode the story for months until Arbuckle was acquitted. When his Hollywood guests asked Hearst how he could do that, Fatty was ruined. Hearst said it was simply business. More and more, he was squeezing his papers for cash.
Hearst's attitude towards his money was the attitude of a 19th century self-made man. This was his money. He had earned it. He had earned it, and therefore he was going to spend it.
George Bernard Shaw said that San Simeon was the place God would have built if he'd had the money. 20 years after he'd made it his home, Hearst was still building.